And good afternoon, my iron sharpens iron family and friends. This is Trey, and today I'm going to be reporting to you on Virginia. So, as we all know, Virginia right now is in the political spotlight for the people in various counties voting to become sanctuary counties in the protection of their gun rights, according to the Second Amendment, as they believe it to stand for, to mean. And the reason I want to talk about them today, because I have questions. I want to know, could it be a Trojan horse? Could Virginia be being set up for what is called a demonstration project in order to pull the rug out from underneath them? In my experience and things I've learned, there seems to be a conflict between people and their government officials as far as what their belief is. So typically, in what I've seen is a citizen, or someone who is approached by a police officer, a sheriff, or whatever, they never really seem to agree on what it means to have constitutional rights. A person, just your average Joe on the street, may have this belief that he has constitutional rights, and when he expresses that to an officer, more times than not, the officer disagrees on how that works. Um, I find it interesting because police officers don't take courses in law school, so I don't know how they determine in that instant who would be correct when they're citing any kind of constitution or statutes, and who would be incorrect if neither person having this dispute is capable of interpreting law. I find that interesting. So I do know that for the most part, the police officers have 24/7 access to the state's attorney if they need to receive legal advice demonstrating whether they are right or wrong. I'm presuming that they make that call prior to an arrest for some, or at least a lot of the circumstances. So ultimately, it's not really the officer making an arrest where we might conceive it to be an unlawful arrest. A lot of times he could be being instructed by his legal expert in the state's attorney's office prior to him deciding that. So it looks like they're supposed to, which I was going to get into at a later time. But today I'm going to describe to you what I see here in Virginia, because this is very important to anyone out there watching, in the sense that I do believe what's happening here is a demonstration project. So, what a demonstration project is the government decides that there is some sort of class of persons or a group of persons who have a certain belief, and they want to know more about those persons and what they believe. So they will contract with all the local communities and all of your community service providers. And when they connect like that, they start doing research to determine what the beliefs of this particular class of persons is. Okay, so that's what we're going to get into a little more today. But first, I want to tell you that the reason it's become a little suspicious to me is because Virginia, now we have all these people who are speaking out saying that they want their protected gun rights. And the General Assembly of Virginia is saying, well, you can't have them because we've already decided for you. Um, Technically speaking, the power of the people has been placed in the hands of their representatives. So basically, their voice is the voice of those representatives. And unfortunately, they don't realize that as they fight for this particular constitutional right. They don't realize that through those representatives, they have made a decision to enact gun laws. So they don't know that at this point. They believe that these laws are not coming from their voice. But unfortunately, you hired the guy who made the determination. So that's how this works. And, I'm not trying to get into whether or not it's right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm not getting into you know, what it all means from the past. And we're focusing now on the present. I'm living in the present. This is the present day, how things operate. And unfortunately, it is what it is, right? So if we learn what they're doing today instead of focusing in on the past of what we believe they should be doing, it gives us a good insight. And that's all I do. I learn government and I share with you what I learn and I share my research. So it looks like in order to, before the Congress gets, you know, the military involved, they are preparing here, because this here is a bill that is being presented in the House to make it illegal for anyone who works for government to disobey what the statute says. Now, it doesn't exactly specify it's, you know, being legislated for this whole gun issue, but I think we can pretty much chalk it up to the timing being not so coincidental now. So as you can see, on Part B here, any public safety employee who, in concert with two or more other such employees, for the purpose of obstructing, impeding, or suspending any activity or operation of his employing agency or any other governmental agency, strikes or willfully refuses to perform the duties of his employment shall, by such action, be deemed to have terminated his employment and shall thereafter be ineligible for employment in any position or capacity during the next 12 months by the Commonwealth or any county, city, town, or other political subdivision of the Commonwealth, or by any department or agency of any of them. This is a really important statement because it's only for 12 months, my friends. So if you happen to be a sheriff that is in support of the citizens and you want to fight with the citizens to get those gun protection rights, then if for some reason you're put out of office for helping those people, you're going to appear to be a hero to the people, aren't you? If you're willing to get up and side with the people, you are going to be looking real pretty. Everyone's going to respect you, love you, and think you're great. But there's really no risk involved in these sheriffs leaving their seats to help the people for a limited amount of time, because in 12 months' time, they can get their job back. So anyone that, any of these officers that are participating in the, I guess you'd call it the rebellion of rights here, will be fired, but don't worry about it. In 12 months, we'll give you your job back. So if the people think you suck, after that, we don't care because we already got their guns, right? That's how I see it, but you know, my opinion, of course. So if we look at these sheriffs and believe that they have taken on a risk or will suffer some sort of consequence for helping people, well, this tells you right here that that is a minimal risk, really has no bearing on much. They have a ton of insurance, so likely they'll still probably get paid if they did get fired. If not, they have a lot of other trusts and pensions and all kinds of goodies. So really, they're not taking any risk in helping the people at this point, as far as I feel to be significant to show or demonstrate that they actually have that in mind. So if this said that they were permanently fired, then I would be like, wow, you know, these sheriffs are really taking a stand here or whatever, but I'm going to say no. But that's, again, just my opinion. And the reason I'm bringing this all up is because I want to this gives me an opportunity to show you why I believe this might possibly be some sort of Trojan horse. So there was a video I did a while back on sovereign citizens. In the sovereign citizen movement, they have conducted some studies, right? And they believe that sovereign citizens are any persons who open a law book. If you read the law, they will believe you to be a sovereign citizen. If you use the terms like sui juris or pro per or any of those types of terms, they will presume you to be a sovereign citizen within that class and that scope of persons. At this time, they've done a little bit of research to determine that they believe sovereign citizens to be mostly peaceful and most of what they do to be legal. However, they do also suspect that some of the sovereign citizen class of persons might be dangerous. However, they cannot conclude that because of, like, I think it was the 600,000 people that they had studied. They really didn't find that the majority of that group demonstrated any kind of violent behavior. So at this time, although they can act on the presumption that anyone who's classified as a sovereign citizen may be likely to pose some sort of danger, it is a low and minimal risk, and therefore they cannot legislate an act punishing someone who is classified as such a person. Now, if these types of persons become violent at any point, then we will see legislation enacted to protect the public in regards to that particular class. As a high risk of endangering the public, sovereign citizen would now be construed to be a dangerous class of persons that all of our officers must approach with a high level of caution and care. And now they will also have probability and reasonability to apply additional force for the safety of the officer, of course. So that's why we're going to get a little deep into this and what I see as being a possible Trojan horse. Of course, like anything, I could be wrong. Maybe this will be something more gaining independence of the state when it comes to these things. It could go that way too, but I always have skepticism, and I like operating on the side of caution. Okay, so before we begin, disclaimer: I am not a sovereign citizen. I am neutral in what that really means, because you have some conflicts or some hypocrisies in what they proclaim a sovereign citizen to be and how they all resemble a certain class. It's a little difficult for me to understand, because my understanding of things are that citizens have duties and obligations. When you're bound by a duty and obligation, you're not really able to be sovereign. That's number one. But number two, a part of civic duty for citizens is to learn government. So if I open up a law book to learn government, I'm not sure how they've deemed someone who does that to be a member of that class, because if I am actually performing my duty, it sort of tells you I can't also therefore then be sovereign. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. But I am neither for nor against people who either self-proclaim to be sovereign citizens or might be classified simply for, like I said, opening a law book. I don't get it. I'll be the first to admit it doesn't make sense to me. So I only observe and analyze and share my thoughts. That's about all I can do. So how we get here, right? We're going to talk a little bit about why I'm concerned. So the term terrorist under Title 18 is defined basically as being what the Virginians are maybe trying to do here. So I don't know if the government itself, if these assemblymen are going to view it to be this way, to be terrorist acts or not. I can't, predict that, but it seems that it is a possibility. So they're right now in Virginia, they're building up militia, which my understanding of it is that there's every right to do so. But at the same time, it's kind of a rock and a hard place, because here you have terrorism defined as the term act of war means any act occurring in the course of declared war, armed conflict, whether or not the war has been declared, or armed conflict between military forces of any origin. So although one has the right to bring together a militia, it may be also construed as being an act of war. And because of the fact that they are fighting for their guns, now you would probably consider them to be armed. And this being a conflict, it would be also, as defined under 3B here, an armed conflict. So I'm not sure if they're going for that or not, but it does seem to me that it would make sense. Now, if we look at the term sovereign citizen, as I told you before, it is also concerned domestic, they're defined as being domestic terrorists, right? So here's what we have for domestic terrorism. Involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. And the term military force does not include any person that has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the Secretary of State, specially designed global terrorist, has been determined by the court to not be a military force. Sorry, that's weird. I don't know what to say about that. So, anyways, back into the scope of what I'm thinking here and what I've analyzed and rationalized by deductive reasoning is that it is likely possible that the people of Virginia, standing up in belief that they have a right to bear arms that shall be uninfringed, somehow the assembly believes that there is a right to infringe that particular right of the people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have legislated against the firearms. I think they're trying to pull only the the big ones, the AKs and stuff like that. So either way you slice it, they're appearing to turn a right into a privilege by limiting the scope of how one would exercise that Second Amendment right. So is this an abridgment of said right, or is it the compelling interest of the state to limit that right? That's really the question on the table. And I think it's already been decided that, or at least I know in Illinois, we have a Supreme Court ruling that says it is unconstitutional to license firearms. So in Virginia, I don't know if that act or if that decision has been made in their particular Supreme Court. But if it was determined here in Illinois to be, unconstitutional to license it, I would presume, therefore, it should be in Virginia as well. But I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know where the General Assembly is coming from versus where the people are coming from. But it does seem to me that when they determine that these people are in violation of legislation's acts, they may in fact be considered to be sovereign citizens. So why is that concerning? If we want to develop a class of persons by which we can identify as being dangerous, we have to first be able to conclude the fact that they are dangerous. So as of right now, from their current studies, they can't conclude that. So being a sovereign citizen is not illegal. You can be one if you want to be one, and if they declare you to be one, it should not put you in jail or get you in trouble, because as of right now, that particular class of persons can't be considered of high risk to pose a harm to the public. So what we have to understand in all of this then is, how do we come up with these conclusions? How do we determine whether or not these people are in fact dangerous? It begins with human subject research programs. So human subject means a living individual about whom an investigator, whether professional or student, conducting research, obtains information or biospecimens through intervention or interaction with the individual, and studies or analyzes the information or biospecimens, or uses, studies, analyzes, or generates identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens. Intervention includes both physical procedures by which information is gathered and manipulations of the subject or the subject's environment that are performed for research purposes. Interaction includes communication or interpersonal contact between investigator and subject. So who's an investigator, friends? Who's an investigator? Policemen are investigators. CPS agents are investigators. The prosecuting attorney is an investigator. All these people are investigators. And if you go back into what I was talking in regards to courts being a mental health facility, this will come together for you. So everybody is investigating and gathering information about you, whether it's an officer of the law or a community service officer. What they do with that information afterwards is they plug it into a system by which they will give their evaluation about your behavior. And this is why they conduct this human subjects research. From that research, they will develop a profile of class of persons such as sovereign citizens, okay? So after they've arrested or have interaction or intervention with these 600,000 people that they've identified and profiled, they now will research that kind of person for every time someone comes up to them and meets the profile, such as studying law, calling themselves sui juris, using UCC codes, filing too many motions into the court. All of these things are like a bell that should go off for the researcher, for the investigator. So if someone demonstrates that they might have read some statutes to a police officer, he is now alerted to the fact that they may be a good subject for human subject research in a community-based research project. This community-based research project is basically open for 10 years or so, 5 years. It depends on the project itself, but they will have to take a certain amount of time where they fund this research project in order to be able to accumulate enough subjects to study. If there's not enough subjects to study, they cannot come up with a conclusion. So this is why police officers, if you'll see like in videos and things, they're constantly asking people if they are a sovereign citizen. It would be in their best interest if the subject that they're studying has admitted to being as such, but it does not eliminate them from being a sovereign citizen simply because they refrain from saying it, don't admit it, or deny it. Because the officer is given the power and authority to analyze and assess one's social behavior. And if it meets the criteria in that the FBI has profiled as being a subject that could possibly be a sovereign citizen, then the police officer can now enter that information into his database, whether you know it, like it, agree with it or not. So once the officer has determined that you might know some law, he can then justify the fact that he has evaluated you for being a sovereign citizen. He will enter that into the database that will very much prejudice your character to every single authority figure you come across, because a sovereign citizen, as defined in these profiles, has demonstrated that they have some sort of mental disability or social social inability because of their behaviors. So this has been said, that also therefore means that they're saying you're incompetent. So if you have become labeled as such a thing, then you also are incompetent, and the officer has justifiable cause or reason to believe that you may possibly be a harm to yourself or a harm to the public. So he can take you into custody for a very short temporary period of time in order to make that determination if you are in fact some sort of harm to the public. If he determines you are not a harm to the public, he can then exercise his authority to release you, which is why they will give you bonds so you can go home. If he determines that you do in fact impose some sort of harm to the public, he will now keep you and try to come up with other reasons as to why he can keep you detained or incarcerated. So Once we have that class of persons identified as being a sort of a risk, we also then have to determine what level of risk. Is it just a nuisance? Is it simply maybe just a mental health disorder that, you know, causes this person to react impulsively? And is that impulsive behavior somehow going to cause a disorderly? Okay, so when you are disorderly, we can take you into custody to protect everyone for a limited amount of time. But if you're violent or have been determined to be a part of a violent class, that changes the game. So in understanding human subject research, we can also understand that this happens with every person we come across. There, you know, the LEAD system, the CANT system, the All Kids and 10 Care systems, all of these systems combined gather human subject research, and you are a subject of that research, whether it is a personal, private, individual research project, or it can be a community research project, which in most cases, that's exactly what it is. It's a community-based participatory research project. Look it up. And the police officers and that, the CPS investigators, all these people together are community service providers, also participants in trade partner agreements to collect all of this data. And then what happens to it is it goes to the university where their professionals can analyze the information or do a forensics of the information in order to come up with some sort of profile or conclusion as to the nature of this particular class of persons. I hope that's making sense because I just said a mouthful and I know it. But it's good to understand these things, and believe me, I'll come to a point in a moment here. So now we understand these human subjects means me and you and our children. Everybody conducts these types of researches. It is this type of research that is funded by federal government, okay? So when we talk about like the IVD and all of those different Social Security acts, this is where it goes into these programs that are designed to research persons so that they can develop a safer environment where the community becomes a more sustainable, economically healthy, and more developmental, like, or increasing in its development as it goes, right? So that's what that is for. Now, back to where we were going with Virginia in just a second, but I want to show you one thing first. Okay, so if you've ever read a legal journal or a medical journal, I just want to put this in your mind so it comes clear. Where do you think they get the information from? So here we have the University of Arkansas Bachelor of Arts in Criminal Justice and Sociology from 2015. And this particular gentleman here created a journal, whereas he was able to identify or study sovereign citizens and what it meant to the legal system. Where do you think he gets the data from? How do you think that he can do this type of analysis? It's because of community-based participatory research programs that are funded by the federal government and designed to create a profile of a class of persons. And then what happens next is they legislate or create this particular person definition, and they put it into your statutes. That's where your persons come from. So this, in the future, may now become a legal definition or a legal term inside of some of the statutes. So now when they impose that into our law, we can now have every officer aware of what a sovereign citizen is, what one looks like, and then eventually we will find out whether or not these class of persons cause a danger and what level of risk will they be if they're dangerous, right? So that's what these journals are for. And he tells you here, this is from 2014, that there was little documentation for him to study to figure out who these people were, what this class of persons represented. So he tells you there's little or no empirical research that has been conducted on the sovereign citizen movement and how it fits into the broader far-right domestic terrorist movement. The main focus of the study is to determine if there is a significant difference between the SCM and the far right in their demographic composition, trial strategies, and trial behaviors, and whether the SCM should be grouped together with the broader far right during analysis. Using the American Terrorism Study, I coded 97 federal court cases involving sovereign citizen defendants and ran basic frequencies on demographic and trial behavior variables on the SCM defendants and compared them to the non-sovereign citizen far-right defendants. So at that time, I think what he's looking at are people who are probably self-proclaiming to be sovereign citizens in that first group. And when they compare to the non-sovereign citizen far-right defendants, as they call them, I would assume this is someone who is not self-proclaiming to be, but they might believe them to be one, and they're still trying to figure it out if they're going to classify them under that same category or not. I hope that makes sense. So the two groups were different at every level. I then ran a bivariate analysis to determine the significance in the differences between the two groups. Results showed that all of the differences between the two groups were significant in relation to demographics, how sovereign citizens behave during trial, and how the government prosecutes sovereign citizen defendants. In conclusion, the SCM is significantly and substantially different and should be studied separately from the broader far right when conducting future research. So you can go ahead and look up this journal if you want more information. I'm not going to get into it too deeply. I just wanted to demonstrate for you how they pull this information and use it to do an analysis of it in legal studies. But this will also end up being done in medical studies as well for social health and welfare. So the information that goes from the cops through the CPS agents and into the courts is studied on in various different departments and categories, so that we can discern with whether or not these people have some sort of mental health problem, or if they're just being, unlawful for whatever cause. And we can determine how they affect the legal system, what they do. We can predict their behavior in the future in order to create legislation or rules and procedures to prevent them from doing what they're doing. That's what all that research is for. So how does this come together with my analysis of the Virginia situation? Here's the thing. When they're doing this type of empirical data study on a class of persons, they are, like I said, they have to have a certain number of subjects before they can even apply a proper research project to it. So in the past, if they had 600,000 people that they were either able to identify through evaluation of officers to be a sovereign citizen, then, or through the self-admission of someone who proclaims to be a sovereign citizen, right? They group all these people together in that 600,000 category, and then they can see that of the 600,000, very few of these people ever did anything to hurt anybody, maybe one or two. That means that they don't have what they want yet. It means that they cannot conclude in the scientific analysis that these particular groups of people are violent in nature, so they can't create legislation to stop them from doing what they dislike them from doing, right? But when we go into Virginia, what we have here now is clearly, it's all what they're trying to do in Virginia is a definite, clear observation of any officer that they would fit the profile. Every Virginian who decides to go up against government thinking they know the law is going to be considered to be in that class of persons. So what this is going to do is it's going to increase the number of subjects that we can now fit into the class of sovereign citizens by that profile, by that definition. So from 600,000 to over 1 million people now might be being researched as the sovereign citizen class. And if more than 1% of these class of persons identified as sovereign citizens are determined to pick up guns and to be violent, therefore, because they picked those guns up, we can now conclude the science to determine that anyone who is labeled as or defined as or observed as being a sovereign citizen is a high risk of being violent, is of high risk of picking up a gun against government, is of high risk and probability to cause harm to the public. And now we can legislate and act to protect the public from this class of persons. And that won't be good because it doesn't take much for them to determine you're a sovereign citizen. You don't have to admit you're a sovereign citizen, or you don't have to say you're a sovereign citizen. The cop will put that in the scenes and you'll never know he said it. So just saying, oh yeah, I've read a couple of, if I read the Constitution, that would be considered to be someone who is identified as a sovereign citizen. This is rebuttable, of course. I mean, unless one says yes to that question, it's not a fact. It's only, a presumption. But the thing is, they don't put it on the paperwork, right? They're not going to say, okay, defendant Jane Doe identified as a sovereign citizen, and they're not going to say that. It's behind the scenes in the paperwork. And so even if you tell an officer no, you don't know it, but there could be that type of identity placed over your head inside of the lead system. It's crazy. So these people in Virginia, as they rise up and decide that they want to, that they know the law somehow, that they know what the Constitution says, they may be classified now as being a sovereign citizen movement or a sovereign citizen class of persons. And if the government determines that they are and doesn't tell us that, what will happen is they will conclude anyone who cites Constitution like they're doing right now is some sort of terrorist group. And the punishment for terrorism is pretty harsh. So that's just my analysis of the situation. Make up your own mind, of course, go do some research and figure out if you think this could be a possibility on your own. I think it is. Or, on the good side of things, what could happen, it could maybe establish some sort of independence for Virginia. That could be the issue too. But it's hard for me to believe that if they intend on giving the officers back all their jobs in 12 months after this has occurred. So I'll let you be the judge. Let me know what you think. Comment, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, or the bell if you want to get future notifications when videos go up. And again, I feel very, very sad, actually, that if that is the case, if I'm correct in this theory, in this analysis, then this is no different than another group of people that did the same thing to a little group of people called the Jews. Social cleansing, racial cleansing of a class of persons undesirable to the rest of society. I hope the police officers that are out there would never partake in such a thing to determine someone has a mental health disability and then pull a bait and switch in order to make everyone who disagrees with the officers become part of that class. I hope they wouldn't do that, but here we are. If they did decide to do something like that, like I said, there's only one other party I've ever known to do such a thing. You be the judge. Have a good day, everybody.